how the role of president is going to change from the 19th century to the 20th century, correct? And what's the last thing we mentioned yesterday? Why are presidents more powerful? Why do they become the more important aspect of things? War and international crises. We mentioned that yesterday, right? What else do we mention? Mass media, okay? That the president can get access to the public anytime he wants. What else do we mention? Weak Congress and the Great Depression, okay? So the role of the president changes, becomes more important. Now, in the 20th century, presidents started to realize something. Teddy Roosevelt, he's a good example, and oftentimes Teddy Roosevelt's considered the first modern president. And Roosevelt wrote in his autobiography, there were several times where he's like, look, I probably don't have the authority to do this as president, but people are going to get mad at me if I do nothing. So I'm going to do something anyway. It's easier to ask forgiveness than ask permission. How many of you all operate under that model? I can see that, Charlie. And I kind of respect that sometimes. Because sometimes I do that too. There's certain things as a teacher you're like, I'll probably just ask forgiveness later and not ask permission. It's paint. Yeah, I'm like, I just paint on the floors, or if I want to drill holes in the wall, I just do it. All right? They're not going to get that mad over it. Okay? But if I were to drill a hole in a student's head, they would get mad over that. Okay? Now, the presidency in the 20th century, things have changed. Okay? In the 20th century, the modern presidency has two different ways that you can act as president. Presidents can be what we call imperial presidents or institutional presidents. Ooh, that sounds like fun. When you hear the word imperial, what do you think of? Japan, that's what you think of. The what is somebody over here? What'd you say? Star Wars? I think of the Emperor. Look, do you want your president to be imperial? Do you want him to be like an emperor? Oh, that's kind of scary a little bit. Look, an imperial president is a president who pushes the limits about what the Constitution permits him to do. These are the people that are like, hey, maybe I don't have the authority to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. They push the limits about what they're allowed to do. These are also individuals who will not trust their subordinates to get things done on their own. They tell them specifically how to get things done. Okay? So if Deal is my Secretary of Defense, I'm like, here's what we're going to do with the military. And he's like, Mr. President, I don't think that's a good idea. And I'm like, I don't pay you to think, I pay you to do what I tell you to do. Right? I'm like an emperor. I give the orders, you take the orders, and then you go make them happen. Charlie, I feel like you'd be imperial. A little bit. Okay? Those are people who are almost obsessive about things. They have to have their way of things being done. Okay? Like somebody who's imperial, if I said, hey, Kennedy, you got to clean the room while I'm gone, I wouldn't just tell you to clean the room. I would tell you exactly how I want it done. You have to use these types of cleaning products. Okay? And you have to put the room back in this order. And you always clean the desks first, then the floor. And you're like, Scalise, I don't think that's the best way to do it. And I'm like, I don't care what you think. Do it my way. Know what I'm saying? Okay? That's an imperial president. Somebody who's not afraid to blur the lines about what's acceptable to do, and they don't trust other people to get the job done. They do it themselves, and they tell them exactly how to get it done. That's opposite of an institutional president. An institutional president stays within the boundaries of the Constitution. They tend to stay within the boundaries of the Constitution. Right? They also trust their government agencies and their subordinates to do tasks. They're the people that say, look, you have expertise in this field. I'm going to trust you to do it. They use the institutions around them to get the job done. Pelfrey, you're my Secretary of Homeland Security. When you tell me we need to do X, Y, and Z at the border, I'm going to trust that you know what you're talking about. All right. And I'm like, hey, secure the border. How you do it, I'm leaving it up to you. Some people can't do that. Some people can't trust others to do the job. Okay. Which one's better, an imperial president or an institutional president? What do you mean it depends, Moses? All right. Why is it easier to do that, Charlie? You're onto something. All right. Imperial presidents are not always bad, okay? Because when you're imperial about something, you get results faster. Okay? And that's a good example with a group project. You're like, hey, you know what? I could let these other people do their task, but they're just going to screw it up. And I don't want them to screw it up because I'm getting a grade for this. So I'm going to tell them what they need to do, and I'll do the bulk of the work, but you do this, and you do this, and do it exactly how I tell you to do it. All right? Sometimes imperial is good. By the way, which administrator, which principal in the building do you think is the most imperial? Look, I'll say it. It's probably Miss Daniels. Okay? But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Okay? Because you're guaranteed to get results. You put Miss Daniels on a job, it's going to get done. All right? And she is like, she's like somebody who, once you give her a task, she won't stop until it's completed. Okay? Institutional. All right? There are benefits to institutional presidents or institutional leaders. Okay? One of them is this: your subordinates, they feel empowered. If I give Kaiser a job and say, you're going to be in charge of, let's say, healthcare policy, all right? And I'm like, I'm going to trust you to come up with the best ways to do this. I'm the president, and I'm letting her make important decisions, not just in her name, but in mine, right? And that's a big deal because she's affecting policy for the whole country, right? She gets to make important decisions, and at the same time, what does that build, like in terms of our working relationship? Trust and loyalty. Okay, she's like, wow, Scalise trusts me to do something really important. That makes her more loyal to me in the long run. Okay, and you spread out the decision making, right? But what's the downside to institutional? Sometimes slow and on the same page. And when you trust somebody to do a job, you're trusting that they do what? A good job. And does that always happen? No. It's like, look, if I left, and we're using an example of I need you to clean and straighten up my room, I could come up with individual tasks for every one of you and tell you precisely what to do, but that's going to wear me out. Okay? So I have to trust that I'm going to leave you guys to do the job, and when I get back, I hope it's done right. And if not, it's going to cause my head to explode. All right? So both sides of this have pros and cons. Okay? And so, Roses, technically, you're right. It kind of does depend. All right? It depends on who you have working for you and how much you trust them. All right? I'll give you a good example. Mr. McGuffin, I think, is very institutional. Now, even as the boss of the building, he makes the decisions, the final decisions, but in large part, he tries to give teachers the ability to run their classrooms as they see fit and implement things as much as as much as they can. And he's like, hey, you're a professional. I want you to act professionally. And I like that. But also think about this for a minute too, and don't say any names, but how many teachers do you know in the building who abuse that? That they don't do what they're supposed to do. And even if it didn't happen to you here, it's probably happened to you at some point in your educational career. You are supposed to do some type of bell ringer, but you can't mandate like certain parts of class or certain teaching. And even if you did, like that's where like if you tried to be an imperial principal, you would get a lot of pushback from people. And sometimes imperial builds up resentment because you resent somebody telling you what to do. Like out of all the principals, only Mr. McKee has taught social studies. And so if somebody who's never taught social studies tried to tell me how to do it, that would frustrate me a little bit. All right? And so that happens sometimes where a president, like let's say a president with zero foreign policy experience, zero military experience, tries to tell the Secretary of Defense that here's the way I want it done, You can build up resentment that way. Okay? Now, one of the things that we're going to move on here in a second, but tonight, there's an article already dropped in your Schoology folder that you're going to read about how sometimes that imperial presidency could potentially result in a dictator, a constitutional dictator. All right? So make sure you read that tonight. I'll send out a Schoology reminder because Kaiser, you, and somebody else told me that the reminder helped. All right? So I'll send that out too. Okay? By the way, would you be more of an imperial or an institutional president? Think of this for a second. Donald Trump, imperial or institutional? Definite imperial. Obama. I know it's like it's out of your experience a little bit because it seems like a long time ago, but he's leans more towards institutional, right? FDR, definitely imperial, right? FDR, everything had to be his way. It's hard to win him over on issues. Okay? Let's talk about some broader roles of the president here. All right? Outside of his constitutional powers, there are some things we expect the president to do. One of them is be a manager when a crisis situation arises. Okay? We look to somebody for leadership when there's a crisis. And we always look to a single person. And for us, that person has become the president. Now, here's an interesting thing here that has happened. When a crisis situation arises, presidents see this as an opportunity. Okay? It's an opportunity for what we call a rally point. Right? A rally point is a chance to rally the American people around you and boost your approval ratings to gain support. In a way, yeah, that's a good way to compare it there. Way to earn some brownie points. All right? Here's a good example of a rally point. Anybody know the context of this picture? Well, who's the he? That's George W. Bush. Post 9/11. It's literally the day after 9/11. Okay? And look, George Bush after 9/11 handles everything pretty well. The night of September 11th, he makes an address to the nation from the Oval Office. The next day, he's in New York City. He's handing out bottles of water to people. He's helping, pick up some trash and move some debris. And he stands up on the rubble and he starts to give like this impromptu speech. And at first, he's just kind of raising his voice a little bit. And somebody says, "Mr. President, we can't hear you." And then somebody hands him the megaphone. He goes, "But I can hear you, and the rest of the world will hear from us soon." And I'm like, oh gosh, this is about to be a really good speech. And all of a sudden, Bush gives like a little impromptu talk that ends up on the news media, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, I'm bleeding red, white, and blue. And you start to feel good about being an American. What do you think happened to his approval rating? His approval rating in the week after 9/11 was near 90%. If you hit, as a president, if you hit 60% approval, that is like top notch. All right, just think, getting 3 out of 5 Americans to approve of you doing your job is a good thing. And he's at 90%. Republicans, it was near 100% for Republicans. Like every Republican loved George Bush. Like, that's my president. All right, that's how you handle a crisis situation. He calms the nation down. He goes to the site. Right, he has troops on the way over to Afghanistan looking for Al Qaeda. Gosh, man, you feel like I want to join. I want to be part of what America's doing. Okay? Now, George Bush, that's a high point for him. But what happens if you don't handle the crisis well? You're going to lose points in your approval rating. All right? George Bush had a low point too. What's this picture? What's the context? After Hurricane Katrina. This is the New Orleans Superdome where people went to because they had no place else to go. You get people walking around in water, and that's days afterwards. It's like waist deep water. It took 3 days for FEMA to get down there. And look, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, they should have known to get down there quickly. But people were upset because George Bush didn't spur them down there. He should have been like, hey, FEMA, get down on there. That's your job. It was even worse when, you ever seen how celebrities will sometimes do like a telethon where they're encouraging people to donate to something. Well, they did a relief fund for Hurricane Katrina, and it didn't help matters that they get up there and they paired Mike Myers with Kanye West. All right, and anytime Kanye's in front of the mic, you know that's dangerous. Mike Myers is encouraging people to donate. This is an important thing. And all of a sudden, Kanye goes, yeah, and George Bush doesn't care about black people. And it's like, oh gosh. And that was something like a kind of a low-key conspiracy theory that George W. Bush didn't care about black people, which New Orleans is a predominantly minority city. Okay? And so, look, that was not the case, but that didn't help. What do you think all that did to George Bush's approval ratings? He takes a hit. He takes a hit. Okay? And that's part of the deal. Being president means when things go well, when stuff gets responded to in an effective manner, you get a boost. Okay? But when you handle a crisis poorly, you take a hit. It's like, here's another example too. In the 1990s, the Chicago Bulls are like the greatest basketball team because who's on their squad? Michael Jordan. Okay? It's hard to lose with Michael Jordan. But when you're the coach of the Bulls and you got Michael Jordan on your team, is it really the coaching that wins games? Not so much. LeBron James, you put him on any NBA team and they're going to be a winner. Right? It's not always the coaching that does it, but the coach still gets credit or blame based on what happens. That's like being president. When things go well, you get the credit, even if it's not in your power of doing it. All right? Now, presidents, they got opportunities for rally points. Here's another one. Obama, 2011, he gets on the TV, and what does he say that Americans have done? We killed Osama bin Laden. All right? And Obama says it in such a way, he frames it like almost like he's there with them, and he gets a bump in his approval rating. All right? And it's a good day for Americans because people are celebrating in the streets. It's one of those rare things. I don't think I've seen many days like that where people are out celebrating, waving flags around, shooting off fireworks. Wow. Do you remember that? Yeah, for you guys were like little though. You were like 6, 7, something like that. 2011. Yeah, it was in May. Fantastic. All right. Now, presidents, other than crisis managers, they're also morale builders. Okay? Think of the president as the nation's preeminent hype man. Right? What do you don't like that comparison there? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Look, the president has to make Americans feel good about things even when the nation's going to hell in a handbasket. Okay? This is the person that they're the ones that give you the information that you need. Like they're like, hey, yeah, you had a bad day, but you know what? Daggone it, you're nice, you're smart, you're good looking, and people like you. Right? And they tell you that even though they know it's not true. The president has a priority to make the nation feel good about itself. Right? Because nobody wants the leader of their country, the face of their nation, to be a Johnny Raincloud. Like, yeah, things aren't really good right now. I don't know if we're going to make it through this crisis. Like, that's not what you want your president to say. Prosperity is right around the corner, guys. Things are going to be better. Why, I think by this time next year, we'll have this COVID problem beat. Right? Who would be your hype man, Lunsford? Who comes to you and cheers you up when things are not good? Aw. Wiley, who's your hype man? Who do you go to that makes you feel better about yourself when you know things aren't going too well? Aw, that's great. What about you, Moses? You got somebody that will boost your morale? Who's that? Which Lauren? Oh, God, I don't know that person that well. All right. Now, presidents are crisis managers, they're morale builders. Presidents also are expected to have an agenda, a policy agenda about what they want to do. They want to get laws passed and they want to get changes in policy that reflect their vision for America. Okay? And there's different types of policy that presidents are in charge of. One of the things that presidents have a lot of control over is foreign policy. Presidents always have more control over foreign policy than domestic. Okay? Foreign policy is how we deal with other countries, right? How do we get other countries to do what we want them to do? You guys are right. You're broad in a broad sense. You're right. And look, Napoleon, short little French guy, took over most of Europe. He said there's two things that motivate people: interest and fear. Okay. So one thing we can do, we offer incentives to countries that help us. What's an incentive we give to other countries? Money, foreign aid. Okay. Let's start with that. We give out billions of dollars of foreign aid every year. And that's foreign aid for humanitarian causes. So when we give money to other nations, it typically has to be used for specific reasons like food, clothing, shelter, things for building up your people. Sometimes it might be for infrastructure, for building up roads, bridges, things like that, right? We give money to lots of people. For example, we give money to Pakistan. Why do we give money to Pakistan? They did. We give money last year. Tima brought this up. We gave money to Pakistan, and part of that money has to be used for gender studies. Why would we do that? What are we wanting them to do if we give them money and they took it that has to do with gender studies? Treat women better. Because, for example, do we look at the Middle East and the Muslim world, the traditional Muslim world, do we think that their standards about how they treat women are what our standards are? No. Okay? So we use money as an incentive, right? Not all that money goes towards gender studies, but we give money to other people, to other nations. And if they don't do what we want, for example, if Pakistan doesn't help us give us information about terrorists and Al Qaeda, what do we threaten to do? Take that money away. Okay? So one of the tools we have for foreign policy is giving foreign aid to people and threatening to take it away. And by the way, do those countries need the money? Desperately. To them, that's a huge investment. Okay? Second tool we have for foreign policy, what do we sell to a lot of countries? What is it? No. Weapons. Okay? We sell weapons to other nations. And one thing America is good at is blowing things up. All right? Now, selling them weapons, we have the ability to produce high-grade weapons. Okay? And we're not just talking about rifles and bombs. We're talking about airplanes. Talking about things that do not come to people easily. Right? And that's another thing, that if we're selling you airplanes, we can just threaten to stop. Technology is super important to this. Now, one of the things we do is we sell them airplanes, but oftentimes we don't give them the full technology that goes with it, or the upgrades that come with it. So in terms of foreign policy, we give them foreign aid, okay? We sell them weapons. And another thing that we do that is significant, what else? What have we been doing to Iran and North Korea? You might not know this. What is it? Not threatening. Nope. Nope. Trade sanctions. Okay? We stopped trading with people. Right? That's a big deal. Okay? And that's a powerful weapon even against big nations. Okay? For example, we always think that we're like, oh gosh, China sells us all kinds of stuff. We'd be in big trouble if China didn't want to do business. Yeah, but they'd be in big trouble too, because we're a marketplace for them. Right? We can produce our own junk if we had to. Right? Who's China going to sell all their stuff to if we stop buying things? Right? We can put economic sanctions. And on Iran and North Korea, that has put them in an absolutely terrible situation. And one of the things that's really interesting is that America has the military muscle to enforce this stuff. Plus, not only do we stop trading with them, what do we tell our friends to do? Stop trading with them. Okay? Now, as a last resort, what's another method of getting countries to do what you want them to do? War, conflict. Okay? Armed conflict. If you try diplomacy, if you threaten to take things away, you do take things away, and then they still don't do what you want them to do, armed conflict is another option, right? For most people, though, for most presidents, armed conflict is a last option, a last resort, right? Now, is there sometimes that you basically, you blow things up pretty quickly? You don't even try diplomacy? Post 9/11, do you think we're going to go into diplomatic efforts with Al Qaeda? No, there will be no diplomacy. Post Pearl Harbor, there's going to be no diplomacy. America pretty well quickly decided that there's one way that World War II is going to end: unconditional surrender of Germany and Japan. Ooh, there'll be no negotiation. Yeah, take that, Nazis. All right, now let's go to the domestic side of things, okay? Presidents don't have as much control over domestic policy. But when you become president, you always have things on your agenda that you want to get done. All right? You always want at least one major piece of legislation to get passed while you're president. Right? Not only because you want to improve America, but you want to be remembered. Franklin Roosevelt, what do we remember him for that's still an issue today? It's still a policy we use. Nope. What do we do for senior citizens that he started? Social Security. Okay? That's Franklin Roosevelt, one of his lasting legacies, instituting Social Security. Right? Something that he can look back and say, look what I did to help America. Eisenhower, my fave president. What's the one policy that he achieved that everybody remembers? You use it every day. Pretty much every day. You drive on it. The interstate system. Close. The interstate highway system. That was Eisenhower's big piece of legislation, his achievement. He can look back and say he did a lot of things, including implementing the highway system. Lyndon Johnson, what does he implement in the 60s? What is it? Welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson gets all kinds of things passed. All right? What would be on your agenda? What's something that would help Americans at home that would be a big deal to you? If you're President Wiley, what's on your agenda? Education policy. George W. Bush had No Child Left Behind. Anybody remember what Obama's big piece of legislation was? Affordable Care Act. Elena, what would be on your agenda? Gosh, you would never even get elected. How about healthcare? Does anybody want to try to fix healthcare? If you've ever had to pay for medical bills before and you didn't have the money for insurance, you definitely would consider that an issue. All right? And if you're the president, you're responsible for coming up with policy ideas and then trying to figure out how to get Congress to pass those. Mia, what would be your big policy idea? Okay, can you be more specific? Racial equality. What are you going to do to achieve racial equality? What kind of law should we pass? It's a tough one, isn't it? What do we do? Pelfrey, what would be your issue? Healthcare? Paul, what about you? Second Amendment? What about it? You think it shouldn't exist anymore? Nice. Oh, this is great stuff. We'll pick up with this tomorrow, y'all.